The Valewood Forest had a way of claiming those who entered unprepared. Its silver-barked trees stretched toward skies that shifted between twilight and starlight, never fully surrendering to day or night. Mist curled through the underbrush like living breath, and the air hummed with ancient magic that made mortal skin prickle with awareness. It was a place of beauty and danger, where the boundary between the living world and the realm of the Fae grew thin enough to tear. Lyria Ashbourne had no business being there, and she knew it. Her boots, worn thin from months of travel, made barely a whisper against the moss-covered ground. Her cloak, once a deep forest green, had faded to the color of storm clouds, and her pack held little more than dried meat, a water skin, and a book of pressed flowers she'd collected from every place her exile had taken her. She was 23 winters old, though her eyes held the weariness of someone who had lived twice that long. She had been banished from her village 6 months ago, accused of witchcraft after the crops flourished too abundantly under her care, and a child recovered from fever too quickly after she'd sung him a lullaby. Fear had a way of turning gratitude into suspicion, and Lyria had learned that kindness could be a dangerous gift when people didn't understand its source. The Valewood had not been her destination. She'd simply walked until her feet gave out, until the world of humans and their cruel judgments felt distant enough to breathe again. When darkness began to pool between the trees, she found a small clearing where the silver bark formed a natural shelter, roots twisted into something almost like a cradle. Exhaustion had become her constant companion, and tonight, she would surrender to it. Lyria gathered what dry wood she could find, though the forest seemed to resist giving up its dead branches. She managed a small fire, enough to warm her hands and heat a meager portion of tea from herbs she'd foraged. The flames cast dancing shadows against the silvered trunks, and for a moment, she felt almost safe. She didn't know she was being watched. High in the canopy, seated on a branch as thick as a horse's body, Thalorian Silvershade observed the human woman with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He had ruled the kingdom of Aetherwyn for 3 centuries, and in all that time, no human had ventured this deep into the Valewood and survived. The forest itself was a guardian, turning away those who meant harm, and confusing those who wandered without purpose, until they found themselves back at its borders, convinced they'd barely entered at all. Yet this woman had walked for hours, moving through barriers that should have repelled her, past wards that should have clouded her mind. She walked as though the forest welcomed her, as though she belonged. Thalorian's appearance would have stolen the breath from any who saw him. His hair fell like strands of moonlight itself, silver-white and luminous even in shadow. His eyes were the color of winter ice touched by starlight, holding depths that spoke of ages witnessed and wisdom earned. He wore robes of deep midnight blue, embroidered with patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, and at his brow sat a circlet of living silver that grew from his very being, marking him as royalty among the elven kind. He should have sent guards to escort her out. He should have appeared before her himself and commanded her departure. The Valewood was sacred, protected, forbidden to outsiders for reasons carved into elven memory through centuries of betrayal and bloodshed. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the way she moved, with a quiet grace that spoke of someone trying very hard not to disturb the world around her. Perhaps it was the gentleness with which she touched the bark of the trees, as though greeting old friends. Or perhaps it was the sadness that clung to her like morning mist, a loneliness so profound he could feel it even from his hidden perch. Lyria finished her tea and carefully extinguished her fire, burying the embers and scattering the evidence of her presence with a practiced care that surprised him. She unrolled her threadbare bedding, little more than a thin blanket that had seen better years, and lay down beneath the shelter of the roots. The night deepened around her. The sounds of the forest rose in gentle symphony, the song of night birds and the whisper of wind through silver leaves, the distant burble of a stream that ran with water clearer than crystal. Lyria's breathing slowed, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion she'd been fighting for so long, and Thalorian remained. He told himself he was simply ensuring she posed no threat. He told himself he was waiting to see if she had companions, if this was some elaborate scheme by those who hunted magical creatures for profit or prestige. He told himself a dozen reasonable explanations for why he stayed in that tree, watching over a sleeping human woman who had no idea an elven king bore witness to her vulnerability. But the truth, which he barely acknowledged even to himself, was simpler and far more complicated. She reminded him of something he'd thought long lost. Hope, perhaps. or wonder, or the possibility that the world held more than the endless weight of duty and the careful preservation of a dying race. The elves of Etherwyn were fading. Fewer children were born with each passing century, and those who remained grew weary of an existence that stretched toward eternity, with little joy to break the monotony. Thalorian had watched friends choose to sail into the west, seeking the undying lands where the first elves had been born, leaving behind the mortal realm and all its troubles. He had stayed because someone had to, because the forest needed a guardian, and the ancient treaties needed an enforcer, and because he had sworn oaths that bound him tighter than any chain. But tonight, watching this human woman sleep with dirt on her cheek, and exhaustion softening her features into something achingly young, he felt the first stirring of something beyond duty: curiosity, interest, a strange protective warmth that settled in his chest like an ember refusing to die. Lyria shifted in her sleep, murmuring words he couldn't quite hear. Her hand reached out, as though searching for something even in dreams, then fell still against the moss. A strand of her dark auburn hair had fallen across her face, and Thalorian found himself wondering what it would be like to brush it aside, to see if her skin was as soft as it appeared. The thought startled him. He had not considered such things in longer than he could remember. The night stretched on. Stars wheeled overhead, visible through gaps in the canopy, their light filtering down in silver shafts that made the clearing look almost sacred. Lyria slept on, unaware of her supernatural guardian, unaware that her presence had disrupted the careful isolation of a king who had forgotten what it meant to feel anything beyond responsibility. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with the faintest hint of rose and gold, Thalorian finally moved. He descended from his perch with the fluid grace of his kind, making no sound as his feet touched the forest floor. He moved closer, near enough to see the rise and fall of her breathing, the faint flutter of her eyelids as she dreamed. She was lovely, in the way humans could be, all temporary beauty and fierce mortality. She would age and fade while he remained unchanged, a truth that had always made connections with mortals feel pointless. Yet here he stood, drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. The forest whispered around him, the trees themselves seeming to lean closer, curious about this development. The Valewood had a consciousness of its own, ancient and vast, and Thalorian had learned long ago to heed its moods and messages. The forest approved of her. More than that, it welcomed her, which meant she was no ordinary human, no simple wanderer who had stumbled into forbidden territory by accident. Thalorian knelt beside her sleeping form, careful not to disturb her rest. He studied her face, memorizing features he knew he would recall for centuries to come, whether she remained in his life or vanished like morning mist. There was strength in the set of her jaw, gentleness in the curve of her mouth, and sorrow in the faint lines that creased her brow even in sleep. What had driven her here? What pain had she fled? What had the world done to chase away someone the forest itself chose to shelter? The questions burned in his mind, demanding answers he had no right to seek. As the first true rays of sunlight pierced the canopy, turning the silver bark to liquid gold, Lyria began to stir. Thalorian rose and stepped back into shadow, merging with the forest as only his kind could, becoming little more than a suggestion of movement, a trick of light. She would wake soon, and he would have to decide: send her away to safety, back to the human world that had rejected her, or allow her to stay, to see what the forest's welcome might mean, what this strange pull toward her might become if given time to grow. For the first time in 3 centuries, Thalorian faced a choice that duty didn't dictate, that ancient law didn't prescribe, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wanted something purely for himself. Lyria woke to sunlight on her face and birdsong in her ears, a combination so peaceful it took her a moment to remember where she was. The Valewood. She'd fallen asleep in the legendary forest that every child in the surrounding kingdoms learned to fear in bedtime stories and travelers' warnings. She sat up quickly, her heart hammering as reality crashed back into focus. She should be terrified. She should be running. Every tale she'd ever heard about these woods spoke of people who entered and were never seen again, of elven magic that stole memories and twisted time, of guardians who showed no mercy to human trespassers. But the clearing looked exactly as it had the night before. Her meager possessions sat undisturbed. The shelter of roots that had cradled her sleep seemed almost deliberately shaped for comfort. And most strangely, she felt rested in a way she hadn't in months. as though the earth itself had soothed her weary bones while she slept. The forest hummed with life around her. Silver-barked trees rose like pillars of some ancient cathedral, their leaves catching the morning light and scattering it in rainbow prisms. Flowers she'd never seen before grew in clusters near the stream she could now see clearly, their petals shifting through colors that had no names in human language. The air tasted sweet and clean, carrying scents of growing things and wild magic. It was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen, and some deep part of her soul recognized it as home, in a way her birth village had never been. Lyria gathered her things slowly, reluctant to leave but knowing she couldn't stay. Wherever she was, however peaceful it seemed, this was not her world. She was an intruder, and sooner or later, the forest's true guardians would notice. She made her way toward the stream to refill her water skin, kneeling by its edge and marveling at water so clear she could count the colored stones on its bottom. As she reached down, she caught sight of her reflection and barely recognized herself. Her face looked thinner than she remembered, her eyes larger and more haunted. Dark circles shadowed the skin beneath them, and her hair hung in tangles she hadn't had the energy to comb in days. "What have I become?" she whispered to her reflection, the words carrying more weight than she'd intended. "Someone who survived," a voice answered from behind her, rich and resonant, and definitely not human. Lyria spun, her heart leaping into her throat, the water skin falling forgotten into the stream. Standing at the edge of the clearing, half shadowed by the trees and half illuminated by morning light, was the most breathtaking being she had ever witnessed. He was tall, easily a head taller than the tallest human man she'd known, with a build that suggested both strength and grace. His hair caught the light like captured moonbeams, falling past his shoulders in silver-white waves. His face held a beauty that made her chest ache, all elegant angles and timeless features, with eyes that gleamed like winter stars. The circlet at his brow marked him as royalty, and the power that radiated from him made the very air shimmer. An elf, a real, living elf. And not just any elf, if the crown was any indication. Lyria scrambled backward, nearly falling into the stream in her panic. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs had turned to water, and her voice stuck in her throat. Thalorian raised one hand in a gesture of peace, his expression carefully neutral despite the way his heart had quickened at her startled reaction. He had debated all morning how to reveal himself, ultimately deciding that honesty served better than continued deception. "Peace, Lyria Ashbourne," he said quietly, pitching his voice to soothe rather than frighten. "I mean you no harm." Her eyes widened further. "You know my name." "The forest knows many things," he replied, which was true enough without revealing he'd spent the entire night watching over her. "And it has been a very long time since a human walked these paths without losing their way." Lyria found her voice, though it came out smaller than she'd have liked. "I'll leave. I didn't mean to trespass. I didn't even know I was so deep in the Valewood until it was too late to turn back, and I was so tired, and I just needed somewhere to rest, and I'm sorry. I'll go right now." "Stop," Thalorian interrupted gently, taking a single step closer. She flinched, and he froze, something twisting in his chest at her fear. How long had she been running? How many had chased her away? "I did not come to cast you out." She stared at him, confusion replacing some of the terror in her eyes. "You didn't?" "The Valewood welcomed you," he said simply. "The trees sheltered you. The earth cradled your sleep. These woods are ancient and aware, and they do not offer comfort to those who would bring them harm." He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "Why are you here, wanderer? What drives a human woman into forbidden territory with nothing but a threadbare pack and sorrow in her eyes?" Lyria's throat tightened. She didn't owe this elven stranger her story, didn't owe anyone an explanation for the path that had led her here, but something in his gaze made her want to speak, to unburden herself of secrets she'd carried alone for too long. "I was driven out," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "from my village. They said I was dangerous, that I practiced dark magic, but I never did anything wrong. I just helped things grow, helped people heal. I sang to the sick and they recovered. I tended gardens and they flourished. I thought I was being kind, but they saw it as something else." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out kindness looks a lot like witchcraft when people are afraid." Thalorian's expression softened, something like understanding flickering in those otherworldly eyes. "You have the gift." "Gift?" She shook her head. It's a curse. It's made me an outcast everywhere I go. Not here, he said quietly, and the certainty in his voice made her breath catch. Here. You are simply someone the forest chose to shelter, and I am curious why. He moved closer, no longer attempting to maintain distance, and Lyria found she couldn't make herself retreat. He knelt beside the stream, his movements fluid and unhurried, and retrieved her fallen water skin from where it bobbed in the current. He filled it carefully before offering it back to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and Lyria gasped at the shock that ran through her at the contact. It felt like touching starlight, like every nerve in her body suddenly woke up and sang. Thalorian's eyes widened slightly, and she realized he'd felt it too. What was that? She breathed. Recognition, he said, his voice rougher than before. The magic in you calling to the magic in me. He stood, but didn't step away, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You are not human, Lyria Ashbourne. At least not entirely. What? The word came out as barely a breath. That's impossible. My parents were human. I'm human. Your parents may have been human, Thalorian agreed. But somewhere in your bloodline there is something else. Something older. The gift you carry. The way the forest welcomed you. The reason you've never quite fit in the human world. He paused, letting her process. You have Fae blood, distant but undeniable. It's why your magic manifests in growth and healing. It's why you hear songs others cannot. Why you see beauty where others see only wilderness. Lyria sank down onto a moss-covered stone, her legs no longer able to support her. Everything she thought she knew about herself suddenly tilted sideways, revealing new angles and possibilities she'd never considered. I don't understand, she said numbly. How is that possible? How would I not know? These bloodlines can skip generations, Thalorian explained, his tone gentle. A human woman might have an encounter with one of the Fae, or an elf might fall in love with a mortal, and that magic lies dormant in the family line until it surfaces again, sometimes centuries later. He studied her carefully. You said you helped things grow and people heal. Have you ever made things happen simply by wishing for them? Ever known things you had no way of knowing? Ever felt drawn to wild places, like you were searching for something you couldn't name? With each question, Lyria's eyes grew wider. Yes. Yes to all of it. The knowing that came from nowhere. The pull toward forests and rivers. The way she'd always felt like she was supposed to be somewhere else. Someone else. What does this mean? She asked, looking up at him with a vulnerability that made his ancient heart ache. It means, Thalorian said slowly, making a decision that would change both their lives, that you have a choice. You can return to the human world and continue hiding what you are, continue running from those who fear your gifts. Or, he extended his hand toward her, an invitation and an offering. You can stay. Let me teach you what you are, help you understand your magic. The Valewood has claimed you, Lyria Ashbourne, and I find I am not inclined to disagree with its judgment. Lyria stared at his offered hand, at the being who had revealed himself to her when he could have remained hidden, who spoke of her gifts as treasures rather than curses. She thought of the long months of exile, the loneliness, the constant fear of discovery and rejection, and she thought of how peaceful she'd felt, sleeping beneath these trees, how right it had seemed to wake in this impossible place. Slowly, hardly daring to believe, she reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their palms touched, light flared between them, soft and golden and warm. Lyria gasped as something inside her shifted, like a door opening onto a room she'd never known existed. Magic surged through her, no longer chaotic and frightening, but clear and purposeful, guided by the steady presence of the elf before her. Thalorian's fingers closed gently around hers, and for the first time in 3 centuries, he felt the weight of isolation lift from his shoulders. Welcome home, Lyria, he said softly, and meant it with every fiber of his immortal being. If you felt the magic of this story come alive, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales that will transport you to worlds beyond imagination. Your support means everything, and helps us continue bringing these stories to life. The journey deeper into the Valewood revealed wonders Lyria had never imagined existed. Thalorian led her along paths that seemed to appear beneath their feet, through glades where the air shimmered with residual magic, and past trees so ancient their roots formed labyrinthine networks beneath the earth. He spoke as they walked, his voice a steady stream of knowledge about the forest, its creatures, and the magic that bound it all together. The Valewood is not merely a forest, he explained as they crossed a bridge of living vines that had woven themselves into a sturdy pathway over a crystalline stream. It is a living entity, a collective consciousness formed from thousands of years of growth and magic. Every tree, every stone, every creature that calls this place home contributes to its awareness. That is why it can choose who to welcome and who to turn away. Lyria listened in fascination, drinking in every word. Questions tumbled through her mind faster than she could voice them, but Thalorian seemed to sense her curiosity and answered many before she even asked. As they walked, she began to notice things she'd missed before, the way certain flowers turned to watch them pass, the small, luminescent creatures that peeked from hollow trees with eyes like stars, the music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a symphony of natural sounds that harmonized into something almost like speech. "Can you hear it?" Thalorian asked, glancing back at her with interest. "The song of the forest?" I think so," Lyria said hesitantly. "It's like music, but also like words I can almost understand." His smile was approving. "Your Fey blood recognizes what your human mind struggles to comprehend. In time, you will learn to hear clearly. The forest speaks to those who know how to listen." After what felt like hours, but might have been mere minutes, time moved strangely here. The trees began to change. The silver bark took on a more luminous quality, and the spaces between the trunks grew wider, more deliberately arranged. Lyria realized they were entering a structure, though one grown rather than built. Walls of living wood rose around them, woven into elegant columns and arches. The ceiling far above was a canopy of leaves that glowed with their own soft light. "The heart of Aetherwyn," Thalorian said quietly. "My home. Our home, if you choose it." They emerged into a courtyard that stole Lyria's breath. It was a vast circular space where nature and artistry merged into something beyond either. Fountains flowed with water that seemed to defy gravity, arcing through the air in graceful spirals before falling into pools lined with stones that gleamed like opals. Gardens flourished in carefully tended beds, but the flowers were unlike anything from the mortal world. Blooms that shifted colors with each breath of wind, vines that bore fruit made of solidified starlight, trees that hummed with barely contained power, and everywhere, moving through this impossible beauty with fluid grace, were the elves. They stopped what they were doing as Thalorian entered, their attention shifting immediately to the human woman at his side. Lyria felt the weight of dozens of eyes, felt herself being assessed and measured by beings who had lived for centuries, who had seen empires rise and fall while they remained eternal. She wanted to hide, to make herself small and invisible, but Thalorian's presence beside her steadied her courage, and she lifted her chin, meeting their gazes as best she could. An elf woman approached, her beauty so sharp it was almost painful to look at directly. She wore robes of deep emerald that seemed to be woven from leaves themselves, and her hair fell in waves of copper and gold. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My lord," she said, inclining her head to Thalorian with respect, but not subservience. "You return with an unexpected companion." "Lady Seraphine," Thalorian acknowledged. "Allow me to present Lyria Ashbourne, who carries Fey blood and has been welcomed by the Valewood itself. She will be remaining with us." The pronouncement sent ripples through the assembled elves. Whispers rose like wind through leaves, and Lyria caught fragments of conversation in a language that danced at the edge of her understanding. Seraphine's eyes, the color of jade touched by sunlight, studied Lyria with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Fey blood, you say? How distant?" "I have not yet determined," Thalorian replied calmly. "But the forest's welcome was unmistakable, and her gifts are evident. She requires training, guidance in understanding what she is. And you have decided to provide this yourself?" Another elf stepped forward, male, with features carved from ice and winter. His hair was the pure white of fresh snow, and his eyes held a coldness that made Thalorian's seem warm by comparison. How interesting. Our king, who has shown little interest in anything beyond duty for the past century, suddenly becomes a teacher to a stray human. "Lord Calith," Thalorian's voice held a warning edge. "Choose your words carefully." Calith smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I speak only truth, as is my right as your oldest advisor. This is highly irregular, my lord. Bringing a human, even one with a trace of old blood, into the heart of Etherwyn, after centuries of isolation, of protecting our realm from outside interference. What has changed?" Lyria felt tension coil through the air, thick enough to choke on. She didn't understand the undercurrents flowing between these ancient beings, but she recognized conflict when she saw it, and she hated being the cause of it. "Perhaps I should go," she said quietly, taking a step backward. "I don't want to cause trouble. You will stay." Thalorian's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own, in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. The touch sent that same electric thrill through her, stronger now than before. "You belong here, Lyria. Do not let those who have forgotten how to welcome strangers convince you otherwise." The rebuke was clear, and several elves had the grace to look abashed, but Caleth's expression only grew more calculating. "Belong?" he repeated softly. "Based on what, exactly? A single night in the forest? The tree's apparent approval?" He turned his attention to Lyria, and she fought not to flinch under that glacial gaze. "Tell me, child, what do you know of our kind? Of our history? Our laws? Our ways?" "Nothing," Lyria admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. "I didn't even know Fey blood could run in human families until today. I don't know anything about any of this." "Honest, at least," Seraphine murmured, and there might have been approval in her tone. "That is more than many humans offer." "She speaks true because she has no reason to lie," Thalorian said firmly. "She sought no audience with us, asked for no favors. She simply needed rest, and the forest provided shelter. Everything that has happened since has been the Valewood's choice, not manipulation or schemes." Caleth studied them both for a long moment before shaking his head. "You defend her quickly, my king. One might almost think you feel something for this lost wanderer." The silence that fell was absolute. Lyria felt Thalorian's hand tighten almost imperceptibly around hers, felt the way his entire being seemed to still beside her. "What I feel," Thalorian said softly, dangerously, "is conviction that the forest does not make mistakes. Lyria will remain. She will be taught, and she will be protected. Am I understood?" It was not a request. The power in his voice resonated through the courtyard, a reminder that however long it had been since he'd exerted his authority, he was still a king, and his word was law. One by one, the elves inclined their heads in acceptance. Even Caleth, though his expression suggested this conversation was far from over. Seraphine approached Lyria, her movements graceful as a dancer's, and extended her hand. "Come, child. If you are to stay, you will need proper quarters and suitable clothing. That mortal garb will not suffice here." Lyria glanced at Thalorian, who nodded encouragingly. Reluctantly, she released his hand and followed Seraphine through an archway woven from flowering vines. As soon as they were out of earshot, Seraphine's demeanor shifted slightly. The formal court mask slipped, revealing something more genuine underneath. "Do not mind Caleth," she said quietly. "He has been advisor to 3 generations of Elven kings and has grown comfortable with the predictability of Thalorian's isolation. Your presence disrupts that, and he fears change like all who have lived too long with things staying the same." "I really don't want to cause problems," Lyria said earnestly. "If my being here is going to create conflict is not always a bad thing," Seraphine interrupted gently. "Sometimes it is exactly what a stagnant court needs. We have been dying slowly here, child, not in body, but in spirit. We go through the motions of living without truly feeling anything, watching the centuries pass with barely a ripple to mark their passage." She paused before a door carved from a single massive tree trunk, its surface etched with patterns that seemed to move in the corner of Lyria's vision. "Thalorian has been the loneliest of us all, bearing the weight of kingship without anyone to share the burden. And then you wandered into his forest, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I saw something in his eyes that looked like hope." The door swung open, revealing chambers beyond that made Lyria gasp. The room was circular, its walls formed from living wood that had been shaped and encouraged into elegant curves. Windows looked out over the forest, though Lyria suspected they were high above the ground, nestled in the upper branches of some ancient tree. Furniture grown rather than built filled the space, a bed that looked like it had been woven from softest moss and spider silk, Chairs formed from bent branches still covered in leaves, a desk where wood grain created natural patterns like flowing water. "These will be your quarters," Seraphine said, gesturing for Lyria to enter. "They have been empty for a very long time. The last occupant was—" She hesitated, something flickering across her face too quickly to read. "Well, that is a story for another time. For now you should rest, bathe, and prepare for the evening meal. I will have appropriate clothing sent to you." "Why are you being kind to me?" Lyria asked suddenly. "You don't know me. I could be exactly what Lord Calith fears, some human trick or trap." Seraphine smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to breathtaking. "Because the forest chose you, and I have learned to trust its wisdom. Because the Lorien has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you in all the time I have known him. And because, child, you remind me of what it was like to be young and lost and searching for a place to belong." She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Welcome to Etherwyn, Lyria Ashbourne. I suspect you are going to change everything." Then she was gone, leaving Lyria alone in chambers fit for someone far more important than an exiled human, with a trace of fey blood, and nowhere else to go. Lyria moved to the window, looking out over the impossible beauty of the Elven realm. Somewhere below, the Lorien was dealing with the aftermath of bringing her here, facing resistance from those who had known him for centuries. She thought of his hand in hers, of the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her, of the certainty in his voice when he'd called this place her home. She had run for so long, searching for somewhere she could simply exist without fear, and she had found it in the most impossible place, welcomed by a forest, and claimed by a king who barely knew her, but somehow saw her in ways no one else ever had. Lyria pressed her palm against the window, feeling the living wood pulse beneath her touch. Magic hummed through it, through her, connecting them in ways she was only beginning to understand. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to herself, to the forest, to whatever fate had brought her to this moment. The forest whispered back, a susurrus of leaves and magic that filled her mind with wordless certainty. "You are becoming who you were always meant to be." 3 weeks passed in the Elven court, and Lyria had never been so exhausted or so alive. Each day brought new lessons, new revelations about the magic flowing through her veins, and the heritage she'd never known she carried. The Lorien proved to be a patient teacher, guiding her through exercises designed to help her sense and shape the natural energy that permeated the Valewood. She learned to hear the forest's song clearly, to understand the whispers of growing things, and the slow, deep thoughts of ancient trees. She discovered she could encourage plants to bloom with a thought, could sense the health of living things by touching them, could draw upon the earth's strength when her own faltered. The magic that had once frightened her, that had made her an outcast, now felt like breathing, natural and essential. But it was not just magic she was learning. Seraphine had taken it upon herself to teach Lyria the customs and courtesies of Elven society, the intricate dance of politics and protocol that governed interactions among beings who had lived for centuries. It was dizzying, trying to remember who held what position, which families had ancient grievances against which others, when to speak, and when silence was expected. "You are doing better than you think," Seraphine assured her one afternoon as they walked through the palace gardens. "When Lady Morell snubbed you at breakfast, you did not rise to the bait. That showed wisdom beyond your years." "I didn't even realize I was being snubbed," Lyria admitted. "I just thought she was busy." Seraphine laughed, the sound like wind chimes. "Sometimes ignorance serves better than knowledge. She expected you to react with wounded pride, and your genuine obliviousness frustrated her more than any clever retort could have." As the days passed, Lyria found herself settling into a rhythm. Mornings were spent with the Lorien, learning to control and channel her magic. Afternoons belonged to Seraphine and her lessons in court etiquette. Evenings were communal, the entire court gathering for elaborate meals that lasted hours, filled with music and conversation and an undercurrent of observation as everyone assessed the human in their midst. And every night, Lyria returned to her chambers and lay awake, thinking about the elf king who had saved her, who looked at her with eyes full of starlight and something she dared not name. The Lorien, for his part, found his carefully ordered existence thrown into beautiful chaos. For 3 centuries his days had been predictable. Audiences and councils, the administration of his realm, the preservation of ancient traditions. He had performed his duties with flawless precision and absolutely no passion, going through the motions of kingship, while feeling increasingly detached from the life he was meant to be living. Lyria changed everything. She asked questions no one else dared, challenged assumptions with the innocent audacity of someone who didn't know better. She brought laughter to places that had been silent for decades, wonder to those who thought they had seen everything worth seeing. And she made him feel things he had thought long dead, protectiveness and pride, certainly, but also something warmer, something that quickened his pulse and made him look for her in every crowd. He found himself making excuses to see her outside their lessons. He would happen upon her in the library, or find reasons to seek her opinion on matters of state, or simply stand at his window watching her walk through the gardens with Seraphine, memorizing the way sunlight caught in her hair. He was falling, and he knew it, and he could not bring himself to stop. The night of the Starfall Festival arrived with perfect timing. It was an ancient celebration, held once every 7 years when the celestial alignment allowed the barriers between worlds to thin just enough for magic to flow more freely. The elves marked the occasion with dancing and music, with feasting and the traditional exchange of blessings for the years ahead. Lyria had spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation. Seraphine had explained the festival's importance and helped her dress in a gown that had been specially crafted for the occasion. It was the color of twilight, deep purple fading to silver at the hems, and it moved like water when she walked. Her dark auburn hair had been woven with flowers that glowed faintly in the dimming light, and Seraphine had taught her the steps to the traditional dances. "You will do beautifully," Seraphine assured her, as they made their way to the great clearing where the festival would be held. "And do not worry about making mistakes. Even we who have danced these steps for centuries sometimes stumble." The clearing had been transformed into something out of dreams. Thousands of lights floated in the air, conjured from magic and starlight, casting everything in a soft, ethereal glow. Tables laden with food and drink ringed the open space, and musicians were already playing, their instruments producing sounds that made Lyria's heart ache with their beauty. Elves filled the space in numbers Lyria hadn't realized existed in Aetherwyn. She had grown accustomed to the few dozen who frequented the palace, but there were hundreds here, perhaps thousands, all dressed in finery that made her feel underdressed, despite Seraphine's assurances. And in the center of it all, speaking with a group of elders, was Thalorian. He wore robes of deep midnight blue that seemed to hold captured stars, and his circlet had been replaced with a more elaborate crown of silver and moonstone. He looked every inch the king, powerful and remote, and impossibly beautiful. When his eyes found her across the clearing, everything else faded into insignificance. He excused himself from his conversation and crossed the space between them with purposeful strides. The crowd parted before him without conscious thought, and Lyria found herself holding her breath as he approached. "Lyria," he said, and his voice held a warmth that sent shivers down her spine. "You look like starlight made flesh. I feel terribly out of place," she admitted quietly. "Everyone here is so... and I'm just..." "You are exactly where you belong," Thalorian interrupted, extending his hand. "And I would be honored if you would grant me the first dance." Lyria's eyes widened. "I don't know if I should. I mean, you're the king, and this is an important event, and surely there are protocols." "There are," he agreed, a smile playing at his lips. "And the protocol is that the king chooses his first partner, and his choice sets the tone for the entire evening. So I ask again, Lyria Ashbourne, will you dance with me?" She placed her hand in his, marveling at how natural it had become to touch him, how right his fingers felt wrapped around hers. "I'll try not to step on your feet." His laugh was low and genuine. "Step on them all you like. I have lived for 300 years. I can survive bruised toes." He led her to the center of the clearing as the musicians struck up a new melody. It was slower than the previous songs, more intimate, and Lyria recognized it as one Seraphine had taught her. Thalorian's hand settled at her waist, warm even through the fabric of her gown, and her free hand came to rest on his shoulder. They began to move, and despite her nervousness, Lyria found the steps coming naturally. Or perhaps it was simply that Thalorian made it easy, guiding her with subtle pressure and perfect rhythm. Around them, other couples joined the dance, but Lyria barely noticed. All her awareness had narrowed to the elf who held her, to the way his eyes never left her face, to the feeling of floating that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with the moment. You have learned well, Thalorian murmured, as they turned in time with the music, both the steps and the ways of our people. Seraphine tells me you have a natural grace for court politics. I think she's being generous, Lyria replied. I'm still not entirely sure when I'm being complimented or insulted half the time. That uncertainty will serve you well. Those who think they understand every nuance are often the ones most easily manipulated. He pulled her slightly closer as they navigated around another couple. But I did not ask you to dance to discuss politics, Lyria. No? Her heart was beating far too fast, and she wondered if he could hear it. No, he confirmed, his voice dropping lower. I asked you to dance because I have wanted to hold you since the moment I first saw you sleeping beneath my trees. And this is the first excuse I have had that would not cause a scandal. Lyria stumbled slightly, and his arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. You. What? Thalorian's eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw centuries of loneliness, of duty without joy, of an existence so long it had lost meaning. And beneath that, burning bright and new, something that looked achingly like hope. I watched over you that first night, he admitted quietly. I sat in the trees and kept vigil while you slept. Though I had no logical reason to do so, I told myself I was ensuring you posed no threat, that I was simply being cautious. But the truth is simpler and more complicated. He paused, seeming to gather courage. You drew me the way the moon draws the tide, inevitable and undeniable. And every day since, that pull has only grown stronger. Thalorian, Lyria breathed, unable to look away from him. I don't understand. I'm just a human with a trace of old blood. You're a king who's lived for centuries. This doesn't make sense. When has the heart ever made sense? He countered. When has magic ever followed logical paths? You appeared in my forest like an answer to a question I didn't know I was asking, and the Valewood itself welcomed you, as though you had always been meant to find your way here. The music swelled around them, and he spun her in a graceful turn, before pulling her back close. I am 300 years old, Lyria. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have loved and lost, though not for longer than you have been alive. I thought I knew everything there was to know about existence, about duty, about the price of immortality. His voice roughened with emotion. And then you smiled at a flower you'd never seen before, and I remembered what wonder felt like. You asked why trees sing, and I recalled when I used to care about such things. You stumbled through a court dance, and I realized I had forgotten what it was like to feel nervous about anything. Tears pricked at Lyria's eyes. You hardly know me. I know that you are kind to creatures smaller than yourself. I know you speak to plants as though they were friends. I know you carry guilt for kindnesses that frightened those who did not understand them. I know the forest trusts you, and in 3 centuries, I have never known the Valewood to be wrong about anyone. He lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. I know that when you smile, truly smile, it feels like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And I know that if you choose to leave when your training is complete, it will hurt in ways I thought I was too old to feel. The music around them was building toward its crescendo, and Lyria realized their dance had carried them to a more secluded corner of the clearing, away from the majority of the celebrating crowd. I don't want to leave, she whispered. This place, these people, you. I've never felt like I belonged anywhere before, but here, I feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. Something fierce and possessive flared in Thalorian's eyes. Then stay, not as a student or a guest, but as someone who chooses this life, this realm. He hesitated, then added quietly, as someone who chooses me, if you will have a king who is far older than he has any right to be, and carries more scars than you can see. I'm mortal, Lyria said, though her heart was singing at his words. Even with fey blood, I'll age while you stay the same. I'll die while you continue. That's not fair to you. Life is not measured in years, but in moments that make it worth living, Thalorian said firmly. I would rather have 50 years of truly living with you than another 3 centuries of merely existing without you. And there are ways, magic that can extend mortal life, though we need not speak of that now. For now I simply ask, do you feel this too? This pull between us, this recognition that goes beyond logic or reason? Yes, Lyria admitted, her voice breaking on the word. Since that first morning when you appeared by the stream, I've felt it. I thought I was going mad, that I was projecting safety onto the first person who showed me kindness. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's like my soul knew yours before my mind could catch up. The music reached its final notes, but neither of them moved to separate. Around them, other dancers were bowing to their partners, preparing for the next set. But Thalorian and Lyria remained locked in their embrace, the rest of the world forgotten. "Say you'll stay," Thalorian murmured, his forehead coming to rest against hers. "Say you'll let me court you properly, with all the ceremony and tradition such things require. Say you'll give us a chance to see what this could become." Lyria's answer was to rise up on her toes and press her lips to his, in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once. Thalorian made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her flower-woven hair, while the other splayed across her back. The kiss deepened, and Lyria felt magic spark between them, felt the forest itself seem to sigh with approval. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Lyria found herself laughing through tears of joy. "Is that a yes?" Thalorian asked, his voice rough with emotion, and his eyes bright with happiness she'd never seen before. "That's a yes to everything," Lyria replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with wondering fingers. "To staying, to being courted, to seeing where this impossible, wonderful thing between us leads." Around them, the music had stopped entirely. Lyria became aware of absolute silence, and she pulled back slightly to find every elf in the clearing staring at them with expressions ranging from shock to delight to calculation. "We have an audience," she whispered, mortification flooding through her. "Let them look," Thalorian said, not bothering to lower his voice. He turned to address his people, keeping one arm firmly around Lyria's waist. "Let it be known that I, Thalorian Silvershade, King of Aetherwyn and Guardian of the Valewood, claim Lyria Ashbourne as my chosen companion. Let any who would challenge this speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence stretched for a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then Seraphine began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clapping that echoed across the clearing. Others joined her, and soon the entire gathering was applauding, though Lyria noticed Lord Calith's hands remained conspicuously still. "You've just made a very public declaration," Lyria said quietly, as the applause continued. "Are you sure about this?" Thalorian looked down at her, and his smile was the most genuine thing she'd ever seen. "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire long life. You are mine, Lyria Ashbourne, if you choose to be, and I am yours, for however long you will have me." "Forever sounds good," Lyria said, rising up for another kiss. "Let's start with forever, and see where we go from there." As their lips met again, the stars overhead seemed to burn brighter, and the magic of the Valewood sang in celebration of a love that had been written in the roots of ancient trees, and the heart of a lonely king who had finally found his home in the eyes of a wandering girl who had never known where she belonged. Until now, the weeks following the Starfall Festival transformed the court of Aetherwyn in ways both subtle and profound. Thalorian had declared his intentions publicly, and though tradition demanded a proper courtship period before any formal bonding could occur, everyone could see that the king and his chosen were already inseparable. Lyria continued her training, but now Thalorian's lessons held new intimacy. He would guide her hands through complicated spellwork, his touch lingering. They would walk the forest paths together, discussing magic and mortality, and everything in between. He showed her the deepest secrets of the Valewood, places even most elves never saw. The Heartree where the forest's consciousness dwelt most strongly, the mirror pool that showed not reflections but possibilities, the Stargrove where the boundary between worlds grew so thin that on clear nights one could see into other realms entirely. "You honor me by sharing these places," Lyria said one evening as they sat beneath the Heartree, its massive trunk pulsing with gentle light. "I know they're sacred." "You are sacred," Thalorian replied simply, lacing his fingers through hers. "These places have been lonely too long. They deserve to know joy again, to witness love rather than simply endure existence." But not everyone shared in the happiness. Lord Calith's opposition had grown more vocal in council meetings. He raised concerns about precedent, about the complications of a mortal queen, for that was surely where this was headed. about the political ramifications of such an unprecedented union. She has Fey blood, Thalorian countered, during one particularly heated discussion. The forest has claimed her. By our own ancient laws, that makes her one of us, regardless of the human half of her heritage. A convenient interpretation, Calith replied coldly. And what of succession? What of the fact that her mortal blood means any children would be even more diluted in their elven heritage? We are dying out, my king. Should we accelerate that decline? We are dying because we have forgotten how to live, Thalorian said, his voice ringing with authority. Because we have isolated ourselves so completely that we have nothing left but duty and tradition, with no joy or passion to sustain us. Lyria represents a bridge between our world and the one beyond these trees. Perhaps that is exactly what we need. The council remained divided, but Thalorian's word was law, and no one could truly prevent the courtship from continuing. Seraphine proved an invaluable ally. She had become genuinely fond of Lyria, and served as a buffer against those who still viewed the human woman with suspicion. She also provided insight into Elven courtship rituals, helping Lyria navigate the complex traditions that govern such relationships. The bonding ceremony is ancient and binding, Seraphine explained one afternoon as they walked through the palace gardens. It is not merely a declaration of intent, like human marriage, but a magical joining of souls. You will be linked to Thalorian in ways that go beyond the physical, able to sense his emotions, sometimes even his thoughts. And he will be similarly connected to you. That sounds intense, Lyria said, trying to process the magnitude of such a commitment. It is, Seraphine agreed, which is why elves do not bond lightly. But when they do, it is forever. Death itself does not break such ties. If one dies, the other feels it like losing part of their own soul. She paused, her expression growing serious. Are you certain this is what you want, Lyria? Once done, it cannot be undone. You would be binding yourself to Thalorian for all the days of your life, however long or short those days may be. Lyria thought of the elf king who had become the center of her world. She thought of the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd forgotten how to ask. She thought of the gentleness in hands that could command storms, the vulnerability in eyes that had witnessed centuries of history. I've never been more certain of anything, she said firmly. I love him, Seraphine. Not because he's a king or because he saved me, but because of who he is beneath all that. Because he remembers what joy feels like when I laugh. Because he gets excited explaining how trees communicate. Because he stays up late reading to me even though he's memorized every book in the library. Because he makes me feel like I finally found the place I was always meant to be. Seraphine smiled, reaching out to squeeze Lyria's hand. Then you have my blessing, for whatever that is worth. I have known Thalorian since he was a young prince, earnest and hopeful, and full of dreams. I watched those dreams fade as the weight of kingship crushed the joy from his spirit. You have given him back something I thought lost forever. For that alone, you have earned my loyalty. The traditional courtship period lasted 3 full cycles of the moon. During that time, Thalorian presented Lyria with gifts both practical and symbolic. A staff carved from heartree wood to focus her magic. A circlet of living silver that would mark her as his chosen. Books on elven history and magic. And countless small tokens that showed how carefully he observed her interests and preferences. Lyria, in turn, gave what she could. She wove magic into growing things, creating a garden outside his chambers that bloomed with flowers from both the mortal world and the Valewood, a living symbol of the 2 halves of her heritage. She learned traditional elven songs and sang them for him in the evenings. She commissioned a portrait of them both from a skilled elven artist, wanting to capture this moment of perfect happiness before time inevitably changed them both. But her greatest gift came near the end of the courtship period. She had been working in secret with several elven scholars, researching her own bloodline, trying to trace the source of her Fey heritage. What she discovered both thrilled and terrified her. Thalorian, she said one evening, finding him in his private study, I need to show you something. He set aside the document he'd been reviewing, immediately attentive to the tremor in her voice. What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way I have, Lyria said, producing a scroll covered in genealogical notations and magical analysis. I've been researching my family line, trying to understand where my magic came from, and I found something significant. Thalorian took the scroll, his eyes scanning the complex web of names and dates. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to shock, to something approaching awe. "This cannot be," he breathed. "Lyria, this suggests that you are descended from Lady Amalthea Starweaver," Lyria finished. "Your sister." The silence that fell was absolute. Thalorian stared at the scroll, then at Lyria, his mind clearly racing through implications. "My sister left Aetherwind 300 years ago," he said slowly. "She fell in love with a human knight and chose mortality to be with him. I never knew if they had children. She never returned, and our father forbade any attempt to contact her." His voice roughened with old pain. "I always wondered what became of her." "She had a daughter," Lyria said gently, placing her hand over his, "who had a son, who had 2 daughters, and so on down the generations until my great-great-grandmother married into the Ashbourne family. The bloodline was diluted over time, the magic sleeping until it surfaced in me." She took a shaky breath. "Thalorian, I'm your niece. 16 times removed, but still family." Thalorian set down the scroll with trembling hands. When he looked at Lyria, tears glistened in his eyes. The first time she had ever seen him cry. "She chose love," he whispered. "She gave up immortality, gave up everything, and I thought she did it for nothing. But she created a bloodline that led to you. She gave up her place here so that 3 centuries later, you could find your way home." He pulled Lyria into his arms, holding her with a fierce tenderness. "You are not just my chosen, Lyria. You are my family, the last living connection to a sister I loved and lost. Do you understand what that means to me?" Lyria clung to him, her own tears flowing freely. "I think I do, and I think she would be happy, knowing that her sacrifice brought us together." "More than happy," Thalorian said, pulling back to frame her face with his hands. "Amalthea always believed love was the most powerful magic in existence. She proved it with her choice, and now her descendant has proven it again by being exactly what I needed when I had forgotten how to hope." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and full of promise. "We are meant to be, Lyria Ashbourne, written in the stars and the roots of ancient trees, and I will spend every day I have left proving myself worthy of the gift fate has given me." The bonding ceremony took place on the night of the new moon, when darkness reigned and magic flowed most freely. The entire court gathered in the sacred grove, thousands of lights floating overhead, and the heart serving as witness to vows spoken in languages older than any present could remember. Lyria wore white, a gown that seemed to be woven from starlight itself, and the circlet Thalorian had given her shone like a crown. Thalorian stood beside her in robes of deep midnight blue, his own crown replaced with a simpler circlet that matched hers, marking them as equals in this moment. Seraphine officiated, her voice carrying clearly through the gathered crowd as she spoke the ancient words that would bind 2 souls into one. Lyria and Thalorian repeated vows, their hands clasped and magic spiraling between them in visible streams of gold and silver light. When the final words were spoken, when the spell settled into place with a sensation like the universe clicking into perfect alignment, Lyria gasped as she felt Thalorian's presence flood into her awareness. His thoughts, his emotions, the vast depth of his love for her, all of it crashed over her like a wave, overwhelming and perfect. And she knew he felt the same from her, knew he could sense her joy and wonder, and the absolute certainty that this was right, that they were meant for exactly this. "I love you," Thalorian said, though the words were almost unnecessary given how completely they now knew each other's hearts. "My queen, my heart, my home." "I love you," Lyria replied, rising up to kiss him as the crowd erupted in celebration around them. "My king, my soul, my everything." The celebration that followed lasted 3 days and nights, music and magic and joy filling every corner of Aetherwind. And through it all, Thalorian and Lyria remained at the center, 2 souls finally complete, a lonely king and a wandering girl who had found in each other the home they'd been searching for all along. Epilogue, where roots meet stars. 5 years passed in the Valewood, though time moved strangely in that place where magic dwelt. To Lyria, it felt like both a lifetime and a moment, each day filled with wonders that never grew old. She had grown into her role as queen, earning the respect even of those who had initially doubted her. Her magic had blossomed under Thalorian's guidance, and she could now do things that amazed even the eldest elves. More importantly, she had helped bridge the gap between Etherwyn and the outside world, carefully reopening channels of communication that had been closed for centuries. And she had given Thalorian something he had never dared hope for: a child. Their daughter, Amalthea, named for the Aunt Lyria had never met but whose sacrifice had made everything possible, was 3 years old, and already showing signs of remarkable magical ability. She had her father's silver hair and her mother's warm brown eyes, and she moved through the world with a confidence that came from being loved absolutely. Lyria sat beneath the heartree, watching Amalthea chase luminescent butterflies through the grove, while Thalorian sat beside her, their hands intertwined as they had been since the bonding. "Do you ever regret it?" Thalorian asked quietly. "Giving up the mortal world completely? You could have chosen to age naturally, to maintain that connection to your human heritage." Lyria looked at him, at the face she knew better than her own, and shook her head. The ritual that had extended her lifespan to match his had been her choice, made 2 years ago when she decided she wanted centuries with him, rather than decades. "I regret nothing," she said firmly. "This is where I belong. With you, with our daughter, with this impossible family we've built." She gestured to where Seraphine was helping Amalthea practice a simple levitation spell, both of them laughing when the butterfly escaped. "I found more than love here, Thalorian. I found purpose, acceptance, magic I never knew I was capable of. I found myself, as did I," Thalorian admitted, pulling her closer. "I was so lost before you, Lyria, going through the motions of living without truly understanding what life meant. You taught me to see wonder again, to feel joy, to believe in tomorrow." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Every day with you is a gift I thought I was too old to receive." Their daughter's laughter rang out across the grove, pure and bright, and both parents smiled at the sound. "She's going to be extraordinary," Lyria said softly. "She already is," Thalorian replied. "She has the best of both our worlds flowing through her veins. She will be the bridge that truly connects Etherwyn to the realm beyond, the proof that different peoples can unite and create something beautiful." "No pressure on her, then," Lyria teased, and Thalorian laughed, the sound still as wonderful to her as it had been the first time she'd heard it. They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the silver trees in shades of gold and rose. Amalthea eventually tired herself out and came running to climb into Lyria's lap, demanding a story about the brave knight and the Elven princess, who had loved each other so much they'd created a family line that led to her. Lyria told the tale, weaving magic into her words so that images danced in the air above them. Her ancestor Amalthea Starweaver, and the human knight who had won her heart, the sacrifices they'd made for love, the legacy they'd left behind. "And that's how you came to be here," Lyria concluded, booping her daughter's nose gently. "Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose love, even when the whole world says we shouldn't. Like you and Papa," Amalthea said wisely, and both parents marveled at her understanding. "Exactly like us," Thalorian confirmed, gathering both his girls into his arms. "We chose love, and it gave us you, and you are the greatest magic either of us has ever created." As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and the Valewood's song rose in gentle evening harmony, Lyria looked around at the life she had built from the ashes of exile and fear. She thought of the girl who had fled her village, alone and terrified, with nothing but a worn pack and a broken heart. That girl had found a forest that welcomed her, a king who watched over her, a magic that made her whole, a love that transcended every boundary the world tried to impose. She had found home. And in the arms of the elf who had loved her since that first night when she slept beneath his trees, unaware that a lonely king had begun to hope again, Lyria finally understood what it meant to truly belong. The Valewood whispered its approval, the heart repulsed with gentle light, and somewhere in the distance, the spirit of an elven princess who had chosen love 3 centuries ago smiled, knowing that her sacrifice had borne the most beautiful fruit. Love, after all, was the most powerful magic, and it always found a way home. Thank you for joining us on this magical journey through the Valewood. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more enchanting tales of love, magic, and destiny. Your support helps us continue creating these immersive stories that transport you to worlds beyond imagination. Until our next adventure, may you always find your way home.